In, find a seat. Keep your friends company by taking a seat closer to the stage. Fill on in. We want to get started in about 45 seconds. Yes. Good morning. You'll have plenty of time to chat. I will start calling you out by name if you're still standing.
First day. And get to stick around for the planning.
Can you give a early like a shout out again for wireless? Send everybody. No scrolling up there. I haven't seen it for a while. We'll do. Thanks.
Brandis, do you need anything? Can I help you?
Just have a seat.
Okay.
I like to see. There've been requests for wireless info, so let's go ahead and bring that up on the screen. But the network is Renaissance_conference, and then the room is ballroom, all lowercase, and the password is Summit16.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. Hi, friends. Good morning. Can I have your attention up here, please? How's everybody doing? Did everyone have a good time at the reception last night and this morning at breakfast? I missed breakfast because I was preparing for this. For those of you I haven't met, I'm Jamie Hand. I'm the Director of Research Strategies here at ArtPlace. And I'm here this morning to talk a little bit about what we've been up to on Research Land and set up the panel that you're going to hear from this morning. It's a really amazing panel. So first, lest you think you can get through an ArtPlace Summit without reference to the Community Development Matrix. For those of you who were with us last year, we kind of hit you over the head with that. Some people call it the creative placemaking bingo card. I'm here to bring that back into the mix and talk briefly about sort of how we're approaching each of those sectors within our work at ArtPlace, and specifically within the research work, and how that work fits into this idea of going from creative placemaking 101 to 201. So a reminder about that matrix, in looking at who does community planning and development in America's communities, we found that our colleagues may generally be organized into 10 sectors. So if you open up the guidebook app, we're going to keep making you do that too, and navigate to the live poll associated with this morning's plenary, you'll see the 10 sectors listed there. So take a minute, you can see it up on the screens as well. Take a minute to answer the poll. There's 2 questions, and let us know where you see your work connecting up to both community development and what type of artistic practice you yourself are working in. Give you guys a second to get there. I'm not too surprised seeing what I'm seeing. Yeah, I think right now we're allowing you to do one, pick the one that most suits your work, but that actually kicks up a question that we're dealing with a lot, both in our application process and in our research. It's exciting to see actually health and housing coming up as pretty popular. So I'll let you keep doing that. But the idea is that, so as a core part of the research strategy, we are taking each of these sectors one at a time and exploring how arts and cultural practitioners have and might be partners in helping to achieve that sector's goals. So essentially, we're very intentionally segmenting and looking at each of these sectors as a single line of inquiry. And in talking with Prentice and talking about the sort of setup for the summit, the parallel in academia would be sort of going from a survey art history class from antiquity to the present, and then moving forward to the 201 version, which is a focus on French Impressionism or something like that. So from the, in the creative placemaking land, it would be that we've understood creative placemaking, that it's a connection to community development sectors, but now we're diving deep into the nuances of sort of what does it look like when you're specifically working in each of these sectors. So the reason why I'm standing here is that today marks the day that we are launching the first 2 field scans that we've commissioned as part of this work. It's really exciting news. We've been working since last September with 3 researchers, and I do want to quickly acknowledge those 3 people. They've been really, really amazing to work with and really helpful in advancing our thinking about creative placemaking. The first is Danya Sherman. Where's Danya? It's hard to see up here. If you can stand. So people can see what you look like. Danya has been working with us on the housing sector work and research. She's based at MIT, and you will have an opportunity to talk with her over the course of today, but once you download the field scan, you will see how smart she really is. Next, we also have Caroline Ross. Where's Caroline? She can stand somewhere? Hey. Caroline is currently on staff at the Urban Institute in Washington, D.C., and she authored the paper on public safety, looking at the intersections of arts and culture and public safety. Those are the 2 that we're releasing today, and this has to do with a sequence of other work that the field scans are related to. The third field scan that we've begun work on is with Sarah Cabbage, who you met yesterday on the opening panel. Where's Sarah? There she is. Sarah has been working on the research related to public health. So the process that these guys have gone through has been really, really amazing and challenging, and we heard Jason Schupak talking yesterday about unicorns quite a bit, and this idea of translation is really, really critical to how we have to understand what creative placemaking is and how we can position it across other sectors. And so Caroline, Danya, and Sarah have, a part of their research involved interviews with tons of professionals, tons of artists, tons of people working at these intersections, so many of you actually have been part of this research process. They also did a sort of survey and deep dive analysis into not only our portfolio of grantees, those of you sitting here and others, but also practices that have existed long before the frame creative placemaking existed. So people that have been working at these intersections, calling themselves social practice artists, calling themselves community artists, other ways of sort of looking at the way arts and this other sector might intersect. So we sort of blew it open on purpose, and that's what you're going to start to see in these field scan papers. The important thing that I want to say about the field scan research is that they are conceived as a sort of first step, and this is why we haven't yet released the health one yet. They are the sort of framing document for a working group. We've also just kicked off the first 2 working groups in housing and in public safety. We met with an amazing group of people in Oakland in the beginning of February. In partnership with LISC Safety, and we're basically working with a working group to take the field scan findings a step further, commission case studies, talk about how to get this work out into the world in a way that's a true resource for practitioners in both of these sectors. We met in Detroit with co-conveners Kresge and Enterprise Community Partners at the beginning of March to kick off the working group for housing. And similarly, we're going to be working with them moving forward and with those working group members to figure out what are the resources that we need to put out into the world and for which audiences in both of those sectors. In both cases, again, this idea of translation is really important because you'll notice in the field scan papers, we're talking to 2 different audiences. And that's a hard thing to do, and that's something that Danya, Caroline, and Sarah really pushed me on, and it's hard for them to write to 2 different audiences, but you'll see that we are talking to arts and cultural producers in the field scans that want to know more about that community development sector. So if you want to understand what's going on in housing or in public safety, you can check that out and start to understand what are the key trends, what are the key things that they care about and that they're trying to achieve. In the other sort of audience for both of these papers is the actual sector themselves, to start to understand what is it that artists do, what is it that artists can do, what is it that arts organizations can contribute to, and we've started to sort of lay out a typology of practices. So you can start to see maybe your work in as artists, you can see your work in these typologies, but as somebody coming to this work for the first time, you can actually start to understand how it is that arts and culture is connecting up to your sector. So now, moving to the panel itself this morning, again, the reason why I'm setting this up is that rather than having me sort of present the research in any more detail than you've just heard, we figured we'd liven things up by bringing in artists who are actually working at these intersections, artists who are connecting up to housing, connecting up to health, connecting up to public safety. The idea is to hear their experience about what it's like to work in these interdisciplinary ways, and to consider how they embody this idea of sort of being a unicorn that has to translate and code switch and understand how to position their work in relation to both other professionals as well as to the community itself. So, to moderate and introduce this panel this morning, I'd like to turn it over to ArtPlace's new managing director, Sarah Calderon, who joined our team in the fall. We were really, really lucky to have her. She comes to us from Casita Maria Center for the Arts and Education in the Bronx, where she was executive director for 7 years and where she collaborated with countless teaching and social practice artists. Sarah also has her own history of artistic practice as a printmaker and a longtime teaching artist, and also brings a background in research and evaluation to both the ArtPlace team and to this panel. So, Sarah, I'll turn it over to you and the panelists.
I think we're all going to just sit, so let's. Yeah. Wonderful. So I am unbelievably excited about this panel that I get to moderate, so thank you all for coming. I will introduce the artists in just a moment, but the other day I met with an executive director of a dance organization who actually is doing dancing all over New York City, but particularly in the Bronx, and he said, you know, I came to you because I wanted to understand how to talk to a real estate developer that I'm trying to create a relationship with. He said, I keep going to talk to him, and he seems to understand what I'm saying, but not exactly. And then he comes to our performances, and he loves them, but he can't see how our work can help support his outcomes and his goals. And so while I was very excited that he came to see me to ask about it, I didn't know exactly what to say. And I think that's what Jamie Hand's amazing research agenda is trying to do, is trying to figure out how to translate that work. So how artists can translate what they're doing to better support community development outcomes, and how we can learn how to, somebody I think said it yesterday, sort of code switch, and to use different language and to understand what different people mean when they use different words in this work. And so each of our amazing artists on this panel are doing that work day to day and have been really successful in the work that they're doing. So I am not going to go into a detailed introduction to each of the artists, but they will be introducing themselves through their work in just a minute. So we have with us Jay Ferreira, Mel Chin, and Elizabeth Hamby. So give them a warm welcome. And I think we'll start with Jay. If you would like to spend a few minutes introducing us to your work, that would be great. So you can go right up there, and the clicker is right on the table next to Elizabeth.
Okay. That's the clicker. So I can't see this.
So you can see it right down there.
All right. We'll just leave it there because I don't like the rest of the slides. Good morning, everyone. All right, so my name is Jorge Ferreira. People call me Jay or Piper. That's my stage name. I'm an actor, a rapper, a writer, and I'm a cop. I'm a deputy sheriff for the Alameda County Sheriff's Office. So my mother told me I could be anything I wanted, and I believed her. So she raised 3 children during the crack epidemic. And we lived in Oakland, and we went to school in Berkeley, and it was rough. Last year, there were about 89 murders in Oakland. When I was a senior in high school, there were 175. And it was a bad time. My next-door neighbor, a young lady, she was murdered, sitting in the car with her boyfriend. Her next-door neighbor, he started selling crack in the 6th grade. He had a baby in the 9th. Last time I checked, he was shot 6 times. A guy a couple of doors down robbed banks. went to prison. I remember when all of the older guys on the block went to the penitentiary for murder, the younger guys, we were kind of hanging out and we were deciding what we were going to do next. You know, some guys were going to inherit the block, and other guys, you know, we decided the arts or sports, just a way out, and I was one of those guys. My mother, on a day-to-day basis, it was never Black History Month, it was Black History Day, every day. You know, we come from greatness. These are the great things that we've done. You're gonna be great. You're gonna do great things, or else. That was every day. And it worked because, like, she has 3 children and all 3 of us graduated from universities. And my degree was in Black Studies. So taking that reality from when I was a kid and using sports to get an education and the arts, rapping and writing. I had a band, we signed to Interscope Records, and we were able to tour the world with some of the biggest acts, Akon and Gwen Stefani and the Black Eyed Peas. And I'd be on stage telling these stories about my youth and talking about the system and the things that are going on in the police. And I'm in India, and India loved it, but you know, none of the people on the block in Oakland knew we existed. And none of the cops were listening to us, none of the politicians were listening to us. And that's when you write music or movies or theater or anything, when you write it for a certain demographic and that demographic is not tuning in, it can be a stressful experience. I'm sure some people know what I'm talking about. We came back from one of the tours, and a young man by the name of Oscar Grant had been killed in Oakland by the BART police. He was unarmed, he was shot in the back, he was lying face down on the BART tracks. Thousands of people attended the first rally. I was there at the Fruitvale BART station, and there were people of all different races and ages and socioeconomic backgrounds, and we wanted justice. We knew that cops existed that didn't care about our community. Some of them were racist, some of them were just uneducated on who we were, some just didn't care. They had a different philosophy that we had, they had different values, and we wanted to get rid of them. They were the bad cops. And I'm looking around and everybody's passionate, and I'm passionate, and the thought crossed my mind, you know, if we actually did get rid of this cop that killed Oscar Grant, or if we could identify all of the bad cops in the country and get rid of them, who would replace them? Because I knew I wouldn't. Looked deeply into myself, knew I wouldn't. I looked at my friends and I looked at all of the people's faces at that rally, and I didn't believe they would either. So the next thought that entered my mind was, if we could magically get rid of all these bad cops and no one that thought like us would be willing to replace them, it's an incredibly high probability that someone that thinks like them would replace them, which would mean that we hadn't covered any ground or made any progress at all. And that was disturbing. I took that feeling with me back on the road, toured more, and then the band began to unravel. You know, my friend was on drugs. And the opportunity came up. I had saved up this money, and I found out you could pay your way into the police academy. I figured they wouldn't hire me, but at least I would be doing my part. I'd be putting my money where my mouth was. And 7 months later, I was giving the commencement speech. And a year after that, I wrote a play called Cops and Robbers that talks about an officer-involved shooting and discusses it from multiple perspectives. Every time I perform that play, chiefs of police come, teachers, cops, you know, ex-offenders, people from the community. Is finally, I'm creating art that's actually reaching the demographic that it was written for. I actually performed the play in the jail, and that was a powerful experience because I didn't know if I had arrested some of the guys that were in there. I didn't know if I had grown up with some of the guys that were in there, but ultimately I didn't care. It was the most powerful thing that I figured I could do at that point in time, so I did it. If anyone has any questions, I'll be glad to answer the ones that I can. Thank you.
The clicker. They said 5 slides. I actually prepared 500, and but then they said really 5. So Ghost was made in '91 in Hartford, Connecticut, and it's sort of housey, right? they say my work in housing. And so this sort of housing. It's a church facade that was there from 1823. It was the Faith Congregation Church that had mobilized the Underground Railroad. It was famous for many things that is about the struggle continued experience. That is the history of Hartford and our country. But urban planning and the highway systems destroyed the entire neighborhood back in the 60s. And sometimes you do a work that relates to a place, and it's inadequate until you actually activate it. And they actually had a Sunday meeting there, and I saw the power of imagination and what that can convey. So in Detroit, you know, during Devil's Night, y'all too young to remember that, but in the east side of Detroit, there was this thing called Devil's Night. And it pushed a principle that the people who are so poor and so crazy and so dangerous that they burn their own ass house up. And that's something to be feared. So I went there and spent a couple of years every night in Halloween in Detroit and began to listen to what they were trying to resurrect in the city of Detroit. And so these projects, though never conceived, was part of something I shared with them because it was this urban renewal that was happening in terms of a farming capacity within their own city. And so sometimes the concepts artists can bring are subordinate to the needs of the people there. And so one was how to transform this image of a house to something that is so surreal and yet could be productive at the same time. You can counteract the aura of burning house in a neighborhood so horribly mangled by what was common perception. So one was you just take the whole damn house and put the roof in the ground and cover it up and grow some mushrooms down there, and you could sell those and create something. Or you can grow worms and you swing the house aside in order to sort the worms. It's kind of an event. And you could then thereby create, you know, devil's night crawlers for the local communities to sell. Sometimes this is called the structure of things given to health, and sometimes just the personal situations where you meet two women that are twins and they want to commemorate, you know, their mother or their house, and so there's just two drawings that they made of their memory, and it shows though they're twins, they had different memories of what that might be, and of course the memories are disappearing. So this is the safe house that was in New Orleans. I went down to after Katrina, to investigate the situation. And not to make art, it was basically to help. But sometimes when you're confronted, not just by the destruction of things, it was the psychological and overbearing weight and the sociological destruction that happened because of negligence and this man-made disaster of the storm. And, but you research to destroy your preconceived notions, and something I uncovered was that 30 to 50% of the inner city childhood population of New Orleans were poisoned with lead before the storm. And there was no support for that. And we initiated the $100 Bill Project and Operation Pay Dirt New Orleans, and it's not about houses at all. It's about people. And just like all the projects are never about the place or the art even, it's about the conditions that we live in. And so there's like the reason why we picked this house was because 3 children came out of that poisoned forever or damaged forever. That leads to a life of inability of education and the capacity for behavioral violence. There's no place for the incarceration of so many youth in America that represents a certain kind of demographic. And if you start understanding the national scale, which we've been investigating over the 10 years, then the place that people live are all poisoned. And Flint has conveyed this. But I know that Grand Rapids, there's twice the number there, and in Omaha, and in Phoenix, there is even that. So anyway, Safe House was just you can create icons, but there's something beyond the icons that must come forward. You know, also when you're making stuff in the neighborhoods, I feel that there's an obligation to share it with the people that live there. We had a little opening party for the people because before the Prospect One art kind of relationship, so we took the art out and just said, let's do this Love Where You Live party. So I remembered standing in front of the Safe House. We weren't finished yet, but I want to share it with them first so I could get approval to be even in this climate where I knew the levels of soil and in the house were like of astronomical limits. Another 400 parts per million is a limit which you never touch. The soil outside this house was 7,000 parts per million. So here we are, and I remember showing them, I said, hey, what does it look like? They say, it looked like a bank. It looked like a vault. You know, I said, okay, I'm going to open this thing up now, and I want y'all to be careful because it's art in progress, right? So we opened it up, and they all ran in. These kids all ran in screaming, where's the money? You know? And we started that project that day when it would be their money, because this project is not about what I can do, what my art can do. It is a project of what their imagination, our representation of that possibly could do, because it goes beyond New Orleans. It's basically about the problem of a material that has been with us way too long and still exists within the blood of individuals that are so young and still have the capacity and should be unburdened. So anyway, we'll go on a little more deeper into this in a minute, all right? Right on. Thank you.
Okay. So my name's Elizabeth Hamby. I'm an artist. I work in urban planning, and sometimes I tell people that this is what it looks like on the inside of my brain. I'm going to share a little bit with you today about my background and the work that I do that sits right at that intersection of art, urban planning, and public health. For about as long as I can remember, I've loved cities. There's something that I find essential about the ways that cities make complexity legible, and the way that there are different kinds of time, different kinds of people, different kinds of space, who are all kind of awkwardly bound together through the intense negotiations between public and private, inside and outside, I and we, that are almost perceptible when you walk down a city street. There's a great quote from Kevin Lynch that I think about all the time where he says, "The city is the product of many builders who are constantly modifying the structure for reasons of their own." And as we've been discussing, it's a great time to be thinking about cities, about places. We live in a rapidly globalizing world, and more than half of all humans are living in cities. And there are a lot of really important questions right now about what a city is, whether it's a discrete place like New York City, where I come from, or a regional phenomenon like the corridors between Washington, D.C. and Boston on the East Coast, or Los Angeles and San Francisco on the West Coast, or perhaps something even more dispersed as a result of global capitalism, the internet, and the ease, politically speaking, of migration, at least for the wealthy, and the urgency of migration for the poor and the oppressed who flee global violence, oppression, and poverty. There are tremendous global dynamics that play out in urban neighborhoods and city streets. Those negotiations between private interest and public good, that essential tension between capitalism and democracy, become perceptible through the urban concepts of proximity, density, rhythm, and speed. So my work is intersectional by nature. As a professional artist working in the spaces of public health and urban planning, I sometimes feel like a professional amateur, but more on that later. Something I've learned in this space is that health is something that we experience as individuals, but the factors that produce health are very much collective. There was an article in the paper this morning about a network of African American women who are part of a movement to start walking regularly in their own neighborhoods.
One woman named Vanessa Garrison described the work saying, "The mental act of saying every day, I'm going to set aside time to do something that's healthy for myself, even though I'm overwhelmed because I can't pay my bills, my neighborhood is riddled with crime, and there are no sidewalks. That itself is an act of resistance, and resist we must." So today I'm going to talk about the ways that I navigate that space between public art, public space, and public health. And I want to talk about what it means to be a public at a moment when the tension that I talked about before between capitalism and democracy that forged our country feels particularly taut. So let's talk about public space and think a little bit about the imagination. In my city, and probably yours, the vast majority of our shared public space is made up of streets. But often streets don't feel like public spaces at all because they're designed and built to serve one constituency, drivers. In the Bronx, which is where I live in New York City, there's a particular evidence that you can't miss around this phenomenon. The highways that were designed to travel the shortest possible distance between 2 points, bowing to that mid-20th century god of efficiency. They cut through neighborhoods, dividing and dispersing communities. Maybe this happened in your city too. So this is a project that I started in 2012 with my partner, Atoy Ramos Fermin. Our shared practice, Meta Local Collaborative, uses performance, installation, and participatory workshops to interrogate and intervene on the dynamics of people and place in our community. Boogie Down Rides celebrates and transforms the streets, our largest public space, through group rides, advocacy, and training. And it's based on a simple concept, an assertion: bicycling is art. There's a lot of evidence in the public health sphere where I work now that says that using active modes of transportation, biking and walking, is good for your health. It helps cardiovascular fitness, it prevents chronic disease, and it can even improve your mental health. But biking is also a symbol in cities like mine of gentrification and displacement. Bike lanes are right up there with coffee shops and wine bars as the harbingers of changes in demographics, culture, and the sense of ownership over and belonging in urban neighborhoods. And there's nothing healthy about that. So Boogie Down Rides confronts those very real fears of gentrification by working with and for Bronx residents. The vast majority of participants on our ride are local, most of them folks of color, and the places we explore, the sites of struggle for the environment, for social justice, many of which live unmarked on the landscape of our borough, deal with local issues and priorities. We partner with advocacy groups and arts organizations and use an expanded notion of the tour to build solidarity and expand the notion of us while reclaiming streets for shared public use. It was Jane Jacobs who said that cities have the capability of providing something for everybody only because and only when they are created by who? By who? Everybody. Okay, good, you are awake. In my city, there are differences of nearly 10 years in life expectancy between neighborhoods that exist just a few subway stops apart. Our zip codes determine as much as our genetic codes when it comes to our susceptibility to chronic disease like diabetes or hypertension. And in my city, perhaps like yours, that has to do with the history and the present day reality of racial and economic segregation. Street Cartographies, this project, takes on this landscape using two tools that are common to New York City, the subway map and the street cart. It took place on a beautiful fall day and taught us that the fastest way to become the most popular person on a New York City street is to hold a bunch of balloons. Participants in the project were invited to place colored dots on a subway map, marking the places in the city that were significant to them, their homes, their favorite parks, the places where they met their spouse. And they received a balloon that matched the color of their dot and a sticker that said, "I'm on the map," in some of the most commonly spoken languages of New York City. This gesture turned the street itself into a map and highlighted the way that cities are made up not of people and place, but people in place. And I think to confront the inequities of health, income, and opportunity that exist between our neighborhoods, our cities, our regions, this is the shift from thinking about people and place to thinking about people in place that we must make. So to wrap up, I want to talk explicitly about art and what it means to be an artist embedded in these fields of urban planning and public health at a moment of such tremendous change. For me, the intellectual work of being an artist has to do with seeing and sensing patterns and systems. The emotional work has to do with leaning into complexity, uncertainty, and discomfort. But the technical work has to do with navigating official bureaucracy, organizing people and events, and looking for opportunities to transform and subvert the systems of power that ultimately both include and threaten us all. This last project is an open streets project in the Bronx called Boogie on the Boulevard. Open streets are a global phenomenon. From Bogota to Los Angeles, people are taking over their streets and using them to bike, walk, play, and build community. Ariella read a quote yesterday from Theaster Gates, and one of the things that I've learned from Theaster was the importance of gesture for artists working in the expanded social field. It's not really about material, he says. It's our capacity to shape things, like our streets, our space, us, we. Public health and urban planning are shifting towards a more holistic understanding of people and the places where they live, work, play, and pray. It's now well understood that building healthy neighborhoods has less to do with making sure that people have access to medical care and more to do with making sure that their air and water are clean, that they can move around freely, that there are healthy, affordable foods that are available to them, but perhaps most importantly, that they're not struggling day in and day out to make ends meet, and that they're free from discrimination and harassment, that they have agency and community. There's still a critical act of imagination that's necessary to begin to think about and to build neighborhoods and cities that are truly healthy and equitable for all, but we have a tremendous opportunity. All the right people, all of the right places, and no better time than this. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's start. I'm really interested, and each of you touched on it in your own way, but sort of and I think we'll start with Jay. If you can talk a little bit about the housing, public safety, health, or other community development outcomes that you are trying to impact, and how you do that as both an artist and as a public servant.
It's a long list of things to do. In the area that we police, it's about a 4 square mile area, about 37,000 people, about 6,000 of them are ex-offenders, about 1,300 on probation or parole. So it's twofold for me because I'm in the community trying to teach the lessons that I've learned, and I'm in the department trying to teach the lessons that I've learned. And those are two completely different worlds with different languages, value systems, beliefs, loves, fears. So it's hard work. But one of the things that we try to do is organize the people in the community on the ground level. In the area that we are, there are a lot of apartment building complexes, a lot of low-income housing there. It's the highest concentration of low-income housing in Alameda County. There are actually, the per capita income is about $19,943 a year. It's 41% under the county average. So getting in there and getting people to understand that you can stay, because a lot of people just move there for 2 or 3 years and then they move on. You can stay, you can take control of this area yourself. That's a job in and of itself. When I got to the unit, it's called the Youth and Family Services Bureau Crime Prevention Unit. I got there about 3 years ago. It was only myself, another deputy, and a lieutenant. But today there are 22 officers in the unit. So we're starting to make an impact within the sheriff's office. We're starting to show them that, maybe you don't have to be a drug cop or a gang cop in order to make an impact within the department and move things forward. So more people are starting to pay attention in the department. And outside of the department, in the community, through the Deputy Sheriff's Activities League, we service 2,000 kids with free recreational programs, which I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for free recreational programs. Football today costs $400. Soccer can $750 to $1,000. If you want an organized team, it's ridiculous, especially for that area. So I've talked so much, I've actually forgot some of the questions that you asked.
But it's all very interesting. So I think you addressed it. I was asking about sort of the outcomes that you're working toward. It seems like there's a variety of outcomes that you're thinking about at every moment, and they cross over from public safety to youth and education.
Right, exactly. Because the outcome can't be, or the goal can't be, to arrest more people this month than we did last month, or to give more tickets this week than we did last week. That can't be the goal. So we're forging a culture where fighting the forces that create crime is just as honorable as fighting the crime. And you're dealing with people that grew up, I wanted to be a cop since they were 5 years old, and watching movies, and the cop in the movie arrested everyone. Right. And then they went to the Marines after that, and they were a hero, and then they came back, and they take their work very seriously of chasing down the bad guy. So we're shifting that to chasing down the bad forces. And that's a lot of hard work, and it's going to take people with a different mindset, more people passionate about justice and passionate about the community going into law enforcement, and more people passionate about being that superhero in law enforcement to widen their vision as to what their target actually is and educating themselves on it.
Great, thank you. Mel, yes. Mel, can you talk a little bit about sort of the outcomes that you're looking at?
Well, the outcome is increased safety for someone living in a neighborhood that may be plagued with lead concentrations that are untenable. The outcome is maybe greater empathy for the conditions that give rise to behavioral violence. And the outcome is to create not only sensitivity, but maybe offer the amplification of those voices on a national level. So some of the policies that lay in waiting, that are postulated but not acted on, can be reinforced by a larger community of those burdened by the problem of lead poisoning. I think that our obligation is probably more about a process rather than thinking of the outcome. I think it's a collective outcome that has to occur. And to really understand this, you have to go, my project basically is moved from initiation to even beyond this idea of delivery. It is almost like to reinforce its place, to know that something invisible and intangible affects all of us in such a profound way that the work is not done until we reach a level of prevention and understanding its presence. It's as a visual artist or conceptual artist to think of something that we can't see as really shaping the course of our lives, So you have a situation where you can see the city of Phoenix in 2002 had launched a paper called, or the school board, it was called Strange Ignorance, that talked about how the impossibility to educate children that have already been damaged or burdened by lead poisoning, and the greater increase of behavioral violence as confirmed by the Cincinnati Lead Report in 2009, that did not show like a 10% or 20% increase after a 30-year study of blood levels and coming back and finding out it wasn't 10, 20, it was a 55% increase of behavioral violence, incarceration, violent crimes committed by those with that levels. So we're talking about something that is, unfortunately, alongside of everything else, paired with the systemic racism, I feel that is undeniable now. Because when you look at the maps, occurs throughout our country. Its concentrations are in the poor and in the African American communities. And so it is almost like a job, and we have now, 450,000 drawings from across the country. That's like 45 million, my math is terrible, but I think it's $45 million worth of fundraise, right? And we were almost ready to deliver because after 10 years, you can get exhausted and to the point of saying, well, you don't want to ask for funding to continue this now. We're ready, we're working with Creative Time and the Smithsonian, and we're going to make a big dealio out of it, right? And then Flint happens, and you say, we're not done. It cannot be done because of what has happened there. And then to know at the same time outside of Flint, double the children are poisoned in Grand Rapids. And where is their voice? And our job is basically, the outcome is that the amplification of voice that supersedes any kind of word of art and place, that it is voice that is heard. And it can be used and pushed in a provocative way to give encouragement to those who lack the guts and political will to transform these conditions. So we're still committed. So anyway.
Thank you. So, and Elizabeth, you spoke a lot about outcomes when you were speaking. So I just want to switch a little bit. You didn't mention, I don't think, that you work also for the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene by day. I do. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you, in that role, sort of how you work as an artist coming into a role like that in city government, how you translate, how you help the people that you work with sort of understand your way of working and thinking about things.
Sure, absolutely. So I talked a little about like my feeling of being a professional amateur. I'm afraid every day somebody's going to call me out and say, you don't really know. But working as an artist in the spaces of kind of urban planning and public health, there's like 3 levels of translation that have to happen. One of the things in particular that I've really learned from being in the health space is what it means to work with scientists. And if there are any scientists in the room, I bow down to you and your brilliance and the importance of research and evidence-based and evidence-informed practice in terms of both justifying work and, quite frankly, understanding it. You know, the scientific mindset is a way of thinking about and understanding the world that can be quite different from how I think about and operate as an artist. So part of what I think I've been very fortunate to encounter is the fact that the evidence is kind of catching up with the practice. The work that's being done right now around the social determinants of health, which really speak to the things that both of you guys referred to as well earlier. You know, this idea that the conditions that you live in, the condition of your neighborhood has a far greater impact on your health than, you know, than your access to medical care. And I think that shift, which is kind of slowly but surely happening in the field, is opening up a space for people like me to work and to operate. But it's certainly challenging. You know, we use a lot of the same words to mean very different things. As somebody who comes from the field of urban planning, to me, a plan is something very specific. But for my colleagues in public health, plans can refer to a much more discrete, something much more discrete, like a patient care plan. So understanding the relationships between patient care plans to community plans to master plans for neighborhoods and cities, I think involves a certain amount of scalability of terminology and a few strategic pivots as we talk through the work.
Great. So I'm assuming that everybody else is feeling the passion of the 3 of you. You know, it comes out in everything that you've been saying. What I'm really interested in understanding is why you care about this work, why you care about these outcomes, why your practice has not been about sitting alone in a studio, and instead has been about opening up to the public sphere. And sort of if you could talk a little bit about, is it the issues that are driving you, the community, the people, the place, sort of what is it? And maybe we'll start with you, Mel.
I still make artwork.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so I'm not the right one to ask that, but no, I think the situation is, we talk about art a lot, and you use that term, and we bring up the word inspiration, what inspires you to do this work. And I think if you're living in the world, you're confronting situations that don't inspire you at all. I don't recommend chasing down toxic environments or disenfranchised situations as a place to be inspired. It is depressing and horrific and unjust. But what it does is, because of the flexibility that you might have, you become compelled. And it's about being compelled because it makes no sense not to do something about this. And then you could apply the creative process to find the angle or perhaps the procedure to bring about a catalytic possibility that didn't exist before. So it is utilizing the tools that have been given us as artists, and then understanding that the obstacles are even our own way of thinking about ourselves, that our preoccupation with our ego or our own notoriety may be the most difficult part, that you have to just let it go. I always tell people I'm too old to be an emerging artist, so I'm a submerging artist. And I think in certain situations in the public realm, it is the only way to go, to be an operative and to share your condition, and to be a mutative person, to say, okay, I've done that part, now we do this part. And there is a place, therefore, for action. Because more, it's the elegance of the poetry of a project coming forward is what you go for. And you're compelled by that and driven by that. So, okay. I don't know.
How about you, Jay?
I believe in life you have to be true to yourself and fearless in what you do, because it's short. You never know when you're going to be gone. And as an artist, you have to be as honest as possible. So in being true to myself, I ended up in a situation that I don't know a lot of people that have been here. So my ability to create art allows me to inform other people about the things that I've seen and that I've learned, and use them as a tool to try to create some sort of understanding and move things forward. It saddens me to discover that so many people are more focused on winning the debate than moving forward or finding a solution. That's probably been the saddest thing that I've learned, that I've realized in the last couple years. So I have to keep going. My mother won't allow me to stop. And that's it. Creativity gives me wings. I don't have to play by all of the same rules that the people from the worlds that I come from have to play by, because I have creativity, and art can make complex things simple. So I can't give it up.
Great. And Elizabeth?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to echo that. Being an artist means that I don't have to play by the rules that everybody else plays by. I think that that's really essential. And I think for me, I feel very lucky to have inherited both the tradition, the art historical tradition, everything that has kind of brought us to this moment in terms of art and creative production, but also the traditions of advocacy and activism that have fused together with those creative practices to produce the world of art and creativity that we're able to inhabit right now. And I feel tremendously lucky to be living and working in this time when it's possible to be a part of these kind of in between positions and processes and to operate in this way. It's too good of a chance to pass up, quite frankly.
So I'd like to open it up for questions, but I realized that I forgot to ask Jay, to put Jay on the spot again, the same question that I asked Elizabeth about how you navigate being in the police department, sort of how you translate for people, how you work with people, sort of what are the barriers that you encounter or the things that you find even easier being an artist in that space.
Right. Well, like I said, going into it, I didn't know if I would make it through the academy. I thought they would get rid of me. I have videos all over the internet talking bad about the system, and so I didn't know, but I was just doing my part. So I figured if I came in, I had to come in loud and I had to come in honest, because like you can die in this line of work. So I had to come in as solid as possible. And in that, surprisingly, it's made some allies that I didn't expect having. And the naysayers, I hear the whispers, but it's never direct. And it's always far off somewhere else. So I just, keep hammering away and staying true to myself and true to what I know, what I've experienced, and being loud with it, putting it on stage and putting it in music. And it's allowed me a certain amount of freedom that, other people don't necessarily have. Some people feel like they have to fit in with the world that they're working in or living in. But it's been a unique situation that was created.
Great. Thank you. Okay, I'd like to open it up, I think, for questions, if there's anyone with questions out there. Let's see. Can we take is there a first question?
I think it might be the first question. Okay. Over here?
Okay.
Hey, first, just to thank the three of you very much for both sharing stories and your point of view and your practice. It's really wonderful to hear you, so thank you. I'm really struck. Oh, yes, let's clap. Yes. I'm struck and enjoying the differences in your practices, discipline and sort of the ways you've come to the work, I guess, and even the language that the three of you are using as you describe your practice. And what sort of excites me at this moment is imagining what it would be like if the three of you collaborated on a project in response to a challenge in a place or context that you all felt investment to work on and around. So given that we probably won't fishbowl that entire experience right now, I'd love to ask if each of you would be willing to share one or two questions that you would ask the other two people up there at the beginning of a collaboration. So what would you ask, not community members or cross-sectoral partners, but what would you ask these other two amazing artists and thinkers if you were going to begin working with them collaboratively to start a project together? I'd really love to hear those questions. They don't have to be answered, just to hear the questions. Thanks.
Wow.
Yeah,
wow,
what an exciting prompt.
Wow.
I've got one off the top of my head, and that has to do with work style. Somebody shared with me a while ago, artists work all the time, right? So we don't have lifestyles, we have work styles. And so I think that if I were to begin a collaboration with my colleagues here, I would want to understand a little bit more about their work styles, because I know for me, the day-to-day of the work can look somewhat different than the narratives that we share back. The day-to-day is much more mundane. And so I would like to know what work looks like on a day-to-day basis for you.
Oh, I thought we were working together based on what you saw. The first thing, my experience in collaboration would be, it sucks. It's terrible. Working with artists is like horrible because everybody got their idea. And so I would ask anybody first, I've asked scientists, I've asked other people that outside my discipline. First, you got to ask what your dream is, because to find some kind of glimmer of angle of association, that there might be a shared one. Obviously, in this, we have a shared dream that maybe this place is so horrible that we can contribute, you know? So anyway, yeah.
Yeah,
Jay.
mine would be similar to that. I would want to know what they were most passionate about. Like, what are you most passionate about? And then maybe what I'm most passionate about, we could, you know, put it all together and find something really powerful to do.
Great, thank you. Second, is there another question out there? Sorry, it's very hard to see from up here.
This question is for George. George, you talked earlier about, you know, in a dream world, if we were able to get rid of all the bad cops, and what if they were replaced by people just like them instead of, you know, by, I think you used the word us. So I'm just curious how, as a police officer, how, so basically that answers the question about the individual. As a police officer, internally, and when you're talking to other people, how do you negotiate the inherent privilege in the routine of law enforcement when you're talking to people about how you do what you do and why you did it?
Well, they can see it. They see how I do what I do. And, you know, quite frankly, it's dangerous, because I'm every day, you know, when I was putting on the uniform, I haven't been on the streets in months now, but every day when I was putting on the uniform, I was doing the job the way that I believed it should be done. And sometimes that can create problems for other people, because, you know, you have to be a team out there. So a lot of things I would do on my own. In law enforcement, it's tricky because anyone could be the leader. If we show up to a call and say one of my partners pulled someone over and it's in my area or my turf, and we show up to that call, I could take control of the call if I want. So there's a lot of freedom out there, but then there are other times when it's their turf and they could take control of the call. You know, so when I take control of the call, is I need you to question that person, I need you to handcuff this person, I need you to transport this person. So everyone works for me, you know, but then when it's someone else, then everyone works for them. So, you know, people come to know what kind of cop you are. They come to know how you work out there just by what you do and by seeing it. I'm not a sergeant, I'm not a lieutenant, I'm not out there telling other people what to do unless they're showing up in my call. But I don't have guys that I'm responsible for in that way. So other than that, they can only see my actions. And to the question that you asked earlier, it's not easy. It's not easy navigating the mindset of art and law enforcement. Like I said, those are two completely different worlds. With law enforcement, you don't really matter. It's all about the community. Their life comes before yours, and it's life and death on a day-to-day, and you have to pay attention to very small details, like what are his hands doing right now? And with art, it's more holistic, and it's 360 degrees, and it's abstract, and it's all about you and what you feel and how you're interpreting the world around you. So to go back and forth between those two on a day-to-day basis, it's extremely difficult.
Yeah, sorry, that was the part I was asking about, and how it impacts your ability to do what you want to do in that position. So thank you.
We have another question? Yes. Oh, here, we have one here.
Jay, this is a bit of a follow-up question. It was deeply resonant when you said, when you looked out and saw these people you felt were bad cops, and you saw you could be an agent of change yourself. And I feel that sense in my own community. Are you part of a national movement to reform police? Are you doing this on your own? How do we start such a movement if you're not already part of it? Where are you in this journey?
Well, in my unit, I think we're pretty cutting edge in the things that we're doing. in attacking the forces that create crime and actually adding reentry as a community policing objective. Because a lot of the people that are going to jail just got out of jail. So if we could figure out how to stabilize that demographic and cut down the probability that they go back, then that's police work. So I believe that's pretty cutting edge in the unit that I'm in. Initially, when I went in, I thought I was by myself. I wasn't trying to change the world. I had to do something for myself. I had talked a lot on the subject over music. I had felt very passionate. I had got a degree in Black Studies and studied. I needed to do something that I felt was the most powerful thing that I could do in that moment in time, and it was that. And when I went in, I found a couple of other people that cared too. So that's our unit. I'm not part of a national movement, but I believe there is, abstractly so, there's a national movement right now. And I'm glad to be doing what I'm doing right now in 2016.
Is there a national reform movement of artists happening?
That's a great question.
Maybe there should be.
Yeah, don't you think there should be? Yeah.
Do you have an idea for one?
Well, I think you have to tackle your own discipline and the delusions that accompany it. That perhaps the methodologies that we go about showing what we do and how we do it may be full of delusions or full of heart sometimes, full of passion, but you need the criticality that goes along with it to investigate these relationships that you have, especially when you move into the public, And many years ago, I'm glad you weren't there because I gave a talk at DIA and I had a rifle hidden under the podium and I pulled it on all the people. I don't have anything on me today. But, and a sniper scope, and I spoke in the voice of a US military sniper ready to take out a target, an assassin for Ronald Reagan. And he was. And then the scope was I put a microphone in there like this, so I took it off, and I spoke in the voice of a HIV virion going through the human body. And the talk was called, "I See the Insurgent Mechanics of Infection." And the postulation was, our world is transformed constantly by covert political, military, business dynamics. And as we enter this world of art, working into the social, could we adopt maybe the covert strategies, which immediately taking the things that kill or transform us permanently, and adopting the efficiency of that for the practice of something quite to the contrary, which is the evolution and preservation of thought. And the humanistic kind of situation that we may be concerned with. I mean, that's what I was saying. It's almost as y'all work, it's to all of us as we work in the field, it's almost how we may want to consider the things that we should not talk about, and to be operatives in our society and really apply the creative practice in another way, alongside of the things you do overtly. Double agent,
Yeah, I think that for a long time within the field of social practice, there was a lot of kind of hand-wringing about, but is it art, and is it art? And I feel like we've finally moved past that conversation and can start to talk about kind of some of what you're describing here. Like, now that we have agreed, okay, it's art, let's move on, how do we use that to leverage real transformation at the global scale or the quite local scale?
Yeah, that's good. I'm glad it's happening. That's cool.
Yes, and hopefully we can continue it. Are there some more questions? I just want to make sure we get everything. Yes.
Yes, thank you. So my questions evolved a little bit since Mel's answer, but so I run a community foundation in Indianapolis, and we just signed on with 20 or 30, it'll probably be 50 to 100 community foundations to go all in on this issue of opportunity, equality, and equity. And I'm really struck by, two of our biggest problems in all of our communities are public safety and public health, which you're working in. And this social practice art that ArtPlace has done such a great job of promoting and connecting. I mean, are we in a position, and this is how my questions have evolved, because my first question was going to be, how can we engage more artists like you, all of you, in public safety and public health? And I know ArtPlace is getting people involved in communities and equity, so we've got that base. But is it naturally happening? I mean, is this just, can we as leaders in our community just kind of wait? Is it happening? Or is there some strategies that we've got to engage more thinkers, more artists, cultural leaders, cultural intellectuals in public safety and public health? Is it happening, or what could we do to make it happen better, faster?
And I think I would add to that as well, and this is something that ArtPlace has been thinking a bit about, or a lot about, is sort of how do you prepare artists to be at that community development table? And so maybe if you could address both of those, that would be great.
Yeah, so I can definitely jump in on the first question in particular. So, like you were saying before, I have a full-time job working for a city agency, and my job there is to be an urban planner, but I always approach my work as an urban planner as an artist. And so the thing about being an artist in a non-art space is all of the other artists come and find you. And people will come and pull you aside and say, I'm also a photographer, I also do this like performative practice. I think often when cities and foundations and nonprofits look for artists to lead projects or to develop ideas, they look outside of their own organizations. But I think, as your practice really evidences, there are folks who are inside. And I think that the interesting opportunity that we have right now is to start to think about what some of the strategies could be to liberate those folks and open up the space for those folks to realize their full potential within their current roles, which involve all kinds of administrative and mundane duties. But I think that that's actually really the key. Like, how do we nurture art inside of agencies and organizations and governments rather than looking for it from the outside?
Or how do you nurture hope? Not artists, but the public. How do you re-engage a public where this concept of art, quotationally, that means quotation. Yeah, okay. Speaking, what the hell is that? I don't know anything about it. Especially if you're in communities that may be struggling, or you're a tech genius working on your next yacht, The spectrum of art is not so well respected and not so well understood, especially at these evolutionary moments. So how do you shake off the mantle of the quotational and bring in and engage it in a capacity where it has relevance to people outside of art is the key, I think. You have to move it on out, I don't know, but...
There are some artists come up to me in law enforcement. Like, I've met a guy that, is a comedian or something, but there are no rappers. There are no guys that represent hip hop in any way, and I'm not surprised because the two worlds are polar opposites. Hip hop is a voice of, like poor black people rapping, telling their stories about how they're disenfranchised and in search of freedom. In law enforcement, the culture is arresting them and sometimes killing them and taking the freedom away. So two completely different poles, and it's necessary. I believe that's the final stage. There has to be an injection of art, and not just art, black art, because there's a serious, racism is real, and it's systemic, and it's not just in law enforcement. And as a matter of fact, going into law enforcement after the Black Studies program was the best education on the racism in mainstream America that I could have ever gotten. When I first made it to the streets, I said, I'm gonna knock on every door and let people know, you know, I'm here and I'm gonna meet all the apartment building managers and the tenants in the area. I don't care if it takes years. The next day, an email went out to everyone on patrol that there was a report of a black male in his 20s or 30s posing as a police officer. And this is in the Bay Area in 2013. So I don't know what's going on in Ferguson, you know? I don't know what's happening in Arizona or South Carolina. This is the Bay Area 2013. So, and the woman, she was in her 20s or 30s, but she's not just an apartment building manager. She probably sits on a jury. You know, she looks over applications, who's going to get the apartment or not. And it's extremely deep. But the battleground is law enforcement, because law enforcement is the visible component of this system, you know, that gets things done by force. So if art talks around it, or, you know, just directly attempts to destroy it without envisioning what it wants it to be, you know, art has to envision what it wants law enforcement to be. Because law enforcement is going to be here for a while. So what do we want it to be? And in order to create it, and then we have to be able to speak the language of it and know the desires and fears of the people working within it. So
maybe what it could be, you know, it's almost like it just as art isn't going through its evolutionary practice, maybe law enforcement, with this kind of knowledge that you have, has the potentiality of evolving into this a field of understanding more about the dynamics that creates criminal violence.
It can.
Yeah, I think there's more to understand. Then we bring up, you know, there was a study of Needleman back in the 80s that young offenders mostly were 10 to 12 times as likely to have lead in their bones within the inner cities of America, in the prisons. And unfortunately, that happened to be a certain population. Yeah. It's something that you can't stop.
So unfortunately, we are going to have to end this wonderful conversation, but I thank you. Yes, I know, I'm sorry. I think this could go on and on forever, and the great thing is that we have the opportunity to continue this conversation in the breakouts that Jamie Hand is now going to introduce. But let me first thank all of our panelists. I greatly appreciate it. So right here.
Excuse me, I know you want to draw to an end. I'm over here. Oh,
over there.
There's just a question that I have to ask, or put something out there, because of the conversation that we were beginning. And so here's what I want to say. There is something extremely powerful, Jay, about your story, because what you brought both into your art and also into the police force, you didn't just bring art as an expression of you as an individual. You brought deep knowledge of your community. And there's something Mel has been trying to say about how we need to bring art as a capacity, whether it's into transforming the police force or other areas of life. So I would like to see ArtPlace start thinking about, almost like an installation, how we can bring artists intentionally, in the same way that you went into the police force, but literally bring it in a place, bring it into the practice to see, to use Mel's words, how that practice and how the artist would evolve. Because we are talking about something systemic, and it's not just the practices of individual artists, but how do we bring art into the center, as a capacity, into the center of the social challenges that we're facing? Thanks.
Thank
heavy.
So,
I really appreciate that comment. There we go. I really appreciate that comment, and I want to connect it also to the one that Brian asked earlier about the, is there a strategy to explicitly connect artists to these practices? And I think I obviously didn't state it clearly enough, but that is what the research is trying to do. That is what our intention is with the field scans. It's not to be a white paper that sits on our blog that maybe some people will read, but it's to take that to a working group that, for example, Jay is part of the public safety working group. One of the reasons that we held it out in Oakland was to be able to partner with his sheriff's office and with their amazing Deputy Sheriff's Activities League. And so working with partners in those other sectors to both sort of vet and understand what it is that we're talking about when we're talking about these artistic practices, but then also to take it into their field, to have them be the ones and the messengers and the couriers of this way of working. So it's not just ArtPlace hoping that some other sectors might listen to us, but that we're actually collaborating in a deep and meaningful way with cross-sector partners in getting this research, these ideas, these sort of types of practices out there. So remains to be seen whether we can do it. It's ambitious. We are trying to do it in a serial way. So again, something that came up both when you guys were trying to answer the poll and said, why can I only pick one? I think the artists here also will quickly tell you that most artists don't like to be put in a box. But there is a reason why we're segmenting and isolating sector by sector. And it's not because the work exists that way necessarily, but it's because we have to understand them sector by sector in order to communicate with those sectors. So there's sort of a communications goal there. But at the same time, I'm remiss, and I often forget to talk about the sort of overarching cross-cutting things that we're learning. So when we see a certain type of practice in the public safety sector that's about promoting empathy and understanding or creating job skills, we're going to see that again in health. We're going to see that again in housing. What we're actually able to surface 10 times through the different sectors is going to tell us even more about what arts can do in a universal way or what artists can do in a universal way. So we are not trying to put people in boxes forever. We are hoping to be able to combine some of this information and some of this learning in a way that is I don't want to say universal, but applicable to a lot of people. But all of this being said, the idea of actually in a very, very specific way, a nuanced way, understanding how artists connect up to each of these sectors is the first step. Then we will take it and put it into the field and work with partners in those fields. So, my bully pulpit. That being said, I think this was also, for me, this is why we do our work. I just want to say that and be able to say that publicly, that I feel so fortunate to be able to do this work. And sometimes when you're in a research role, you're kind of head down and in books and sort of not engaging as much with the practices, but these are the types of practices and the types of people that we're able to work with and support. So I feel very fortunate and just wanted to say that publicly. This is also a great setup for what we're going to do in our breakout sessions this morning. First, we have a 30-minute break, but at 11 a.m. we're going to pick up with the sort of discipline-specific, not sector-specific, not community development sectors, but the actual artistic practices. So as if you can look in the guidebook or in the program, you'll see that we are organized by architecture and design, dance, music, things like that. We know that not all practices are equally appropriate for every community development challenge or opportunity. So there's a little bit of sort of overlaying or mapping sort of the community development challenge to the artistic practice that we need to be able to start to learn more about. So we're excited at ArtPlace to learn with you and from you in these breakout sessions about what it is that you think the unique value add is of that particular artistic practice in meeting community development challenges. Some guidance on which breakout session to choose. Don't necessarily go to the one that deals with the discipline that you're most familiar with. I mean, you're welcome to. In that sense, we will tap into you and ask for your sort of experience and guidance. But also consider the ones that you'd like to learn more about that might complement the work that you're already doing. We've got great content teed up for all of the sessions, but do want to especially encourage anyone who's undecided to join music, dance, or literature. Those are the ones that we are sort of emerging and sort of not the most obvious when you think about creative placemaking, but I think there's some really rich content there that we would love to get your feedback on. So again, breakout begins at 11, and now we have our 30-minute break. Now would be a good time to change into comfortable shoes just during this break, because we will be doing our site visits and our lunch outside and at Roosevelt Row. So just a reminder about that. Okay, thanks.